That is the first thing you must understand, before I tell you about the night the beast bowed. For 40 years I had held Caldrith Hold against the ice and the raiders and the slow, grinding cruelty of the northern winters, and in all that time I had bent my knee to no god, no counsel, no woman, no fear. My father had knelt once, to a warlord who spared him, and he had spent the rest of his life ashamed of it. I swore I would give no man that satisfaction. I was Osric, and the plateau was mine, and the black iron walls of my fortress had never once let an enemy inside them. So when I tell you that I knelt on the frozen stones of my own hall before a ragged girl who could not speak, you will know that something had come into my house that was stronger than 40 years of iron. But I am ahead of myself. Let me begin where it truly began, at the edge of the pit, on the coldest night of that winter, with the whole court laughing. We kept the beast beneath the eastern tower. I do not remember a time when it was not there. It had been chained in that pit before my father's father took the hold, a thing out of the old world, a moon wolf grown to the size of a war horse, its coat the gray-white of a blizzard sky and its eyes the pale gold of a winter moon. The old records called it a god-hound, a beast bred in the drowned kingdoms of the far south before the sea took them, brought north as a war prize and never once mastered. No handler had ever put a collar on it that it did not break. No king had ever laid a hand on its coat and kept the hand. It had killed 9 of my own men across my reign, and it would have killed more, but I had long since forbidden anyone to go near the pit's edge without my leave. We did not keep it for war. It could not be used for war. It answered to no one. We kept it because to have such a thing chained beneath your tower was to tell every rival lord on the plateau that the Iron King held a power older and darker than any of them dared. It was a symbol. It was a warning. And on the long black nights of deep winter, when the drink ran and the hall grew cruel, it was a spectacle. That was what the night began as, a spectacle. I had come down late to the great hall, having spent the evening with my war captains over the spring campaign, and the feast was already loud and ugly with wine. My cousin Havard was on his feet, red-faced, holding court over some knot of men near the lower tables, and there was a sound coming up from the direction of the pit that I did not like, a hooting, jeering sound, the sound men make when they have found something weak to torment. "What is this?" I said. I did not raise my voice. I have never needed to. The hall quieted in that ring-outward way it always did when I spoke, the silence spreading from the high table down to the doors. Havard turned, still grinning, too far into his cups to read me. "A gift, cousin," he called, "for the beast. We found it wandering the low road at dusk, half frozen, half starved. No packmark, no name, no tongue in its head. A stray." He laughed. "We thought, since the godhound has not been fed a proper sport in years." I was already moving. Down the length of the hall, past the tables, toward the iron doors that led to the pit gallery, and the men fell back from me on either side because they had learned long ago what it cost to be slow to move when the Iron King was walking. I came out onto the gallery, the stone lip that ringed the pit, waist-high wall between the hall and the long drop to where the beast lived, and I saw what they had done. They had put her on the wrong side of the wall. There was a girl standing on the narrow ledge that ran along the inner face of the pit, above the beast's reach but not far above it, pressed back against the cold stone with her thin arms flat against it, and below her the great moon-wolf had come up out of the shadow of its den and was standing with its head raised toward her, its pale eyes fixed, its breath smoking in the torchlight. She was perhaps 20 paces from its jaws. One good lunge, one snapped chain length of slack, and it would have her. She was small. That was my first thought, how small she was against the black wall in a threadbare gray cloak gone stiff with frost, her feet wrapped in rags, her dark hair frozen in ropes against her face. Half-starved, Havard had said, and I could see it was true. She had the sharpened look of someone who had not eaten in days. But she was not screaming. That was the thing that struck me and would not let go. Every soul that had ever stood that close to the beast had screamed or wept or begged. She stood with her back to the stone and her eyes on the wolf, and she was not making a sound. "Get her out," I said. Havard had come up behind me, still half laughing, though the laugh was going thin now that I was here. "Cousin, the sport hasn't even. Get her out." I turned on him, and whatever he saw in my face put the last of the wine courage out of him. "You have put a helpless woman on a killing ledge for your amusement, and if that beast takes her, I will put you down there after her. Get her out. Now." The men scattered to obey, for the ropes, for the long hooks we used to move carcasses to the pit, for anything. But the ledge was reachable only by a narrow iron stair on the far side, and the beast stood between the stair's foot and where the girl was pressed, and no man in that hall was fool enough to go down and put himself in reach. I saw it in an instant, that there was no quick way to reach her, that the ropes would take too long, that if the wolf decided to end it, it would be ended before anyone touched her. I put my hands on the wall to vault it myself. I do not know what I meant to do. I had no more power over that beast than any of them, less perhaps, for it had killed my men and knew my scent as an enemy. But I could not stand on the safe side of the wall and watch it happen. And that was the moment she began to sing. I have tried in the years since to describe the sound to people who were not in that hall, and I have never once come near it. I have heard the finest singers of the plateau. I have heard the choirs of the southern temples on the one embassy of my youth. I have heard my own mother sing the old cradle songs of the north before the fever took her. None of it was like this. It was low at first, a single held note, rising up out of that thin frozen girl with a fullness that had no business coming from a body so starved. It was not loud. It should have been swallowed by the great stone throat of the pit. Instead, it seemed to fill the whole space, to press against the walls, to settle into the bones of the fortress itself. It was a note with a shape to it, a note that was reaching for something, and after a moment it opened into a line of melody in no tongue I knew, old and strange and unbearably sad, and beneath the sadness something older still, something that was almost a summons. And the beast went down. Not dead, down. The great moon wolf that had killed 9 of my men, that no blade had mastered in 3 generations, that had stood snarling and gathered to lunge not a breath before it lowered its head. It folded its forelegs beneath it and lay down on the floor of the pit with its muzzle toward her, its pale eyes half closing, and it made a sound I had never heard it make in all my life. A low sound deep in its chest, not a growl. Something like a whimper, something like grief. The whole hall had gone silent. Every man on the gallery, every servant frozen at the doors, every drunk half risen from the tables, all of them staring down into the pit at the impossible thing that was happening there. And I stood with my hands still on the cold wall, and I felt it. I need you to understand that I was a man of 40 years who had long since decided he would live and die without a mate. Not from any wound of the heart. I had simply looked at the thing others called the bond, the faded pull, the mate mark that was supposed to wake on a man's skin when he found the one made for him, and I had decided it was a story for people softer than I was. My mark had never so much as warmed in 40 years. I had a faded thing over my heart, a pale old scar shape that every wolf-blooded man of the north carries and most never see wake, and I had made my peace with the fact that mine never would. I had a kingdom. I did not need a wife. I told myself I did not want one. When she sang, the mark woke. It was not a gentle thing. I have heard other men since describe the waking of the bond as a warmth, a gladness, a quiet certainty. Mine came like the crack of ice on a spring river, a sudden splitting heat over my heart, sharp enough that my hand went to my chest, and then a flood after it, warmth pouring out from that one point through my whole body until I was standing there on the cold gallery burning, staring down at a starved mute girl in frozen rags who had just laid a god-beast down with her voice, and I knew, not thought, not guessed, knew the way you know your own name, the way you know the ground is under your feet. Mine, that one was mine, and I had almost let my cousin feed her to the pit for sport. I do not remember giving the order for the stair. I remember I was on it, going down into the pit myself, and men were shouting behind me because the Iron King was walking straight toward the beast that had killed 9 of his own. And the beast lifted its great head and looked at me, and I braced for it to come, and it did not come. It watched me. Its pale eyes went from me to the girl and back, and something passed through them, some old animal reckoning, and it laid its head back down. It let me pass. She had stopped singing when she saw me coming. She had pressed herself back against the wall again, and now the fear was in her face at last, not of the beast, I understood later, but of me, of the huge armored man coming down the stair with the whole cruel hall at his back. She had every reason to fear me. She had been dragged off the low road by my kinsmen and put on a ledge to die for their entertainment, and now the lord of the place was descending on her, and she could not even ask what he meant to do. I stopped a few paces from her. Up close she was younger than I had thought, and more worn, and her eyes were a startling gray, the exact gray of the beast's winter coat, and they were fixed on me with a terror she was holding very still. I did the only thing I could think to do. I went down on one knee on the floor of the pit, in front of the girl and the beast and my whole silent court, so that my face was below hers, so that I was not looming over her, and I took off my cloak, the heavy fur-lined thing that was the warmest garment in that hall, and I held it out to her. "You are cold," I said, quietly, as gently as a voice like mine can manage. "Take this. No one here will touch you again. You have my word, and my word is iron in this hold." She stared at me. She did not understand. I did not yet know if she understood any of my words at all, only that she read the kneeling and the offered cloak, and the fact that I had put myself below her. And after a long moment, with a hand that shook, she took the cloak. And the great moon wolf, watching, thumped its heavy tail once against the stone floor of the pit, like a dog by a hearth. The Iron King knelt to no one. But I knelt to her that first night, before I even knew her name, because there are some things a man recognizes below all his iron, and she was the truth my whole hard life had been arranged to deny. They had called her a stray with no name and no tongue, and both things were half true and wholly wrong, and the untangling of them took the better part of that winter. She could not speak, that much was true, but it was not that she had no tongue. It was that she had chosen silence, or had it forced on her so long that it had become a country she lived in. When I had her brought up out of the pit and settled in the warm rooms near my own, with fires and food and my own household women to tend her, and a guard on the door whose only duty was to keep others out, never her in, she took the food and the warmth with the wary gratitude of an animal that has learned not to trust a kind hand, and she said nothing. I did not press her. I am not a patient man by nature. 40 years of command had taught me to want things done and done now. But I found with her a patience I had not known I owned. I would come to her rooms in the evenings when the day's rule was finished, and I would sit not close, always across the fire, always with the door open, so that she would know she was not trapped, and I would simply talk. I told her about the hold, about the winters, about the beast in the pit, which she seemed to want to hear of most of all, her gray eyes fixing on me whenever I spoke of it, about my father and his one shameful kneeling and how it had shaped me. Foolish things, things I had never told another soul. I talked into her silence night after night, and slowly, the way the sun comes back to the north after the long dark, she began to come out to meet me. First it was her eyes losing their flinch. Then it was small things. She would tend the fire before I came so that it was built high the way I liked it. She would set out the second chair. Then one night I brought her a thing I had found in the old stores, a carved bone flute, gray with age, that had come north with the beast's captors in the drowned kingdom days and lain forgotten in a chest for 300 years. I did not know why I brought it to her. Something told me it was hers. When she saw it, her whole face changed. She took it from my hands as if it were a living thing. She turned it over, and her fingers found the holes of it as if they had always known them, and she raised it to her lips and played. And it was the melody from the pit, the old strange summoning song, but soft now, and unafraid, filling the warm room the way it had filled the cold pit, and I sat very still and let it wash over the woken mark on my chest and did not trust myself to speak. When she finished, she looked at me. And then, the first sound I ever heard from her that was not song, she spoke. Her voice was rough with long disuse, barely a whisper, but it was there. "Neve," she said, and touched her own chest. "My name is Neve." I could have laid my whole kingdom at her feet in that moment, and thought it a poor gift. The story came out slowly after that, over many nights, in that rough, rusty whisper that grew stronger the more she used it. She was the last, she told me, of a people the drowned kingdoms had made and then forgotten. The Moon Singers, they had been called, women born into a single bloodline whose voices carried a power bred into them across 1,000 years. The great beasts of the Old South, the godhounds and the moon wolves, had been shaped by that same lost art. The singers and the beasts were two halves of one forgotten craft made to answer each other. A moon singer could gentle a war beast no chain could hold, could wake it, could lay it down, could, the old stories said, call it its true name, the name buried under all its rage, the name from before it was made a weapon, and by that name free it. Her line had fled north when the sea took the drowned kingdoms, and dwindled and hidden and dwindled more, until there was only her mother, and then only her, wandering the low roads of a cold country that had no place for the last singer of a drowned people. Her mother had died 2 winters past. Neve had gone silent after grief and caution, for a woman alone who cannot defend herself learns that a voice like hers draws exactly the wrong kind of notice. She had been walking the low road below Caldrith, half dead of cold and hunger, when my cousin's men had found her and decided she would make a night's sport. "Heard it," she whispered to me that night, her eyes going toward the eastern tower. "When they brought me into the hold, I heard it under the stone. I have never heard one of the old beasts before. My mother told me they were all dead, all lost with the kingdoms. But I heard it grieving down there in the dark, and I thought, if I am going to die tonight, let the last thing I do be a kindness to the last thing left as alone as I am." She looked back at me. I sang it the beginning of its true name. Only the beginning. I did not know if I remembered the rest. "And it lay down," I said. "And it lay down." Her rough voice caught. 300 years it has been chained under your tower, my lord, and no one ever once sang it. It only wanted its name." I sat in the firelight and thought of the beast I had kept as a symbol and a spectacle, the killing thing beneath my tower, and understood for the first time what it truly was, not a monster, but a captive, a made weapon that had spent 3 centuries in the dark with no one to speak the one word it was starving for. 9 of my men it had killed, and every one of them had come at it with a blade or a chain or a torch, and not one had ever come at it with a name. "Can you free it?" I asked her. "The true name, the whole of it, do you remember the rest?" She was quiet a long moment. "I think so," she said. "But my lord, if I sing it the whole of its name, it will not be your beast any more. It will not be anyone's. It will be free. It may leave. It may—" She hesitated. "The stories say a beast called by its true name will follow the one who freed it or go as it chooses, but it will never again be a thing that can be chained." I looked at this woman who had been dragged into my hold to die, who owed me and my house nothing but grievance, and who was still, even now, more troubled by the freeing of a beast that had nearly eaten her than by anything that had been done to her. "Then we will free it," I said. "It has been 300 years in the dark. That is long enough for anyone. I should tell you about the winter between, the slow, warm turning of it, because it is the part I hold closest now, and because it is the part the world does not see when it tells this story. The world remembers the pit and the bowing beast and the kneeling king. It does not remember the ordinary evenings, which were the truest thing of all." I did not tell her about the mark, not for a long time. It seemed to me a low thing to do, to come to a woman who had been given to me as sport and say, "You are fated to me, the bond has chosen, you are mine," as if the destiny were a claim I could press, as if it were one more thing being decided about her by someone else. She had spent her whole life with other people deciding her fate. I would not be another. If she was to come to me, she would come freely, choosing, or she would not come at all, and I would carry the woken mark to my grave in silence and count myself lucky only to have known her. I meant that. I have never meant anything more. So I courted her the slow way, the honest way. I did not send jewels or make speeches. I learned her. I learned that she took her bread torn, not cut, that she could not abide a closed door, and I had every door in her wing taken off its hinges that first week, that she loved the hour just before dawn, the blue hour, and would sit at the window watching the plateau go from black to gray, that she was fiercer than her thin frame suggested, and had opinions about the running of my hold that were sharper and better than half my counsels, and gave them to me in that growing whisper, without the least fear. Once she trusted I would not strike her for it. I learned the exact gray of her eyes in every light. I learned that when she was happy, truly happy, a thing that came rarely and was hard-won, she would hum, not sing, just hum, low and unconscious, some scrap of the old melodies, and that the sound of it did something to the mark on my chest that I could not have described to any man and would not have if I could. And she learned me. She learned that the Iron King the plateau feared was, in his own hall in the evenings, a tired man who had been alone a very long time and had forgotten he minded. She learned to tease me, which no living soul had dared in 20 years, dry little whispered barbs about my scowl, my gruffness, my refusal to sit still, and I found I would have suffered any indignity to earn one. She learned that when I said my word was iron, it was, that the guard on her door truly was there to keep the hold out and not her in, that when I said no one would touch her again, no one did, and that when I learned the full tale of how my cousin had come to put her on that ledge, I stripped Havard of his lands and his place at my table and sent him to the far garrison, and did it not for my honor but for hers. There came a night deep in the heart of winter, the plateau locked in ice, the fires high, when she was sitting across from me at the hearth and had gone quiet in a new way, a thinking way, turning the bone flute over and over in her hands. "You have never asked me," she said at last, "to sing for you, in all these weeks. Everyone who has ever known what I am has asked me to sing, for them at them to prove it, to use it. You brought me the flute, and you have never once asked me to play it." "It is yours," I said. "It is not mine to ask for." She looked at me across the fire for a long moment, with those gray eyes that had learned, over the winter, to hold mine without flinching. "There is something in you," she said slowly, "that woke the night I sang in the pit. I felt it. I did not understand it then. I have felt it every night since, sitting here, a thing in you that turns toward me like the beast turned. You have never named it. Why?" And I understood that she knew, that she had known, perhaps, longer than I, that the bond ran both ways and had been calling to her across the hearth all winter. While I sat silent thinking, I protected her by hiding it. I could have kept the iron up. Habit and pride and 40 years told me to. Instead, I did the second hardest thing I have ever done, which was to tell her the truth with nothing held back. "When you sang in the pit," I said, "a mark woke on me that had slept my whole life, the old bond mark, the one that wakes for a man only once, only for the one he was made for." My voice was not steady, and I let it not be steady. "It woke for you. It has been awake every hour since. I did not tell you because you have spent your whole life having your fate decided by other people, and I would not be one more. If it is nothing you want, it changes nothing. You have your rooms and your safety and your place here for as long as you live, bond or no bond, and I will never speak of it again. But you asked, so I will not lie to you. The thing in me that turns toward you is the truest thing I have. It turned toward you before I knew your name, and it has not turned away since." The fire cracked in the silence. She had gone very still, the flute forgotten in her hands. And then she rose and crossed the space between us, and knelt down in front of my chair the way I had knelt in front of her that first night in the pit, putting her face below mine, giving me the same gift I had given her, and she took my hand, and pressed it flat against the old woken mark over my own heart, and held it there. "All my life," she whispered, "people have wanted my voice. You are the first who ever wanted the silence too, who sat in it with me and did not ask me to fill it." Her gray eyes were bright. "I felt the bond wake in me that night too, my lord. I have been waiting all winter, sitting across your fire, for the fearsome Iron King to be brave enough to say it first. I have led charges into the teeth of raider hosts. I have stood on the walls of Caldrith through sieges that broke lesser men. I do not know that I have ever in my life been as afraid as I was in the moment before I answered her, or ever as glad as I was after." "Neve," I said, "last singer of the drowned kingdoms, will you have a hard old king and his cold hold and his freed beast, and be no man's spectacle ever again, but my wife and the North's queen and your own woman first of all?" "Yes," she said, not in a whisper, in the full voice she had sung within the pit, the voice that filled the room and pressed against the walls and settled into the bones of the fortress. "Yes, I will." And somewhere far below us, under the eastern tower, in the dark where it had lain 300 years, the great beast that could hear its singer's heart through all that stone lifted its head and howled, not in grief, this time, but in something that in a beast is very close to joy. We freed it on the first day of the thaw. I brought the whole court down to the pit gallery to see it, the same court that had jeered her onto the killing ledge, my war captains and my kin and the household to the last soul, ranged along the wall where they had laughed. I did not do it to shame them, though I will not pretend the thought had no sweetness in it. I did it because they had all, every one, helped make that beast a monster with their fear, and they would all, every one, witness it unmade. Neve went down the iron stair alone. I would have gone with her, and she would not let me. This was hers, the last work of her drowned bloodline, and no king's protection belonged in it. She walked out across the floor of the pit to where the great moonwolf rose to meet her, and it did not tower over her now, or if it did not seem to. It lowered its huge head down to her level, and she put her thin hands on either side of its great gray face, and she leaned her brow against its brow. And she sang it its name. I cannot tell you the name. It was not made of sounds a man's mouth can hold. It was the whole of that old summoning melody carried through to its end, the end she had not been sure she remembered, and I heard her remember it. Heard the song go somewhere it had not gone in the pit that first night, up and up into a place of such aching sweetness that grown war captains along the wall beside me put their hands over their faces and wept, and did not know they were doing it. The mark on my chest blazed with it. The very stone of the fortress seemed to sing back, and the great beast that no king had mastered in 300 years stood in the pool of that song with its eyes closed, and let the last singer of the people who had made it give it back the one thing that had been taken, its name, itself, the truth of it from before it was ever a weapon. When the last note fell, the beast opened its pale winter eyes, and it bowed down onto its forelegs, its huge head lowered to the floor of the pit before her, a thing that had bowed to no blade, no chain, no king, laying itself down of its own free will before the one who had unmade its cage. Then it rose and it shook itself, the whole great blizzard-colored length of it, and where the old iron collar had sat unbreakable for 3 centuries, the metal simply fell away in pieces, as if it had only ever been held by the beast's own consent to wear it. It was free, and it turned and looked up at the gallery, at the whole silent, weeping, humbled court that had come to laugh, and then it looked back at Neve, and it stayed. It chose to stay. It walked to her side and sat, an unchained god-beast the size of a war-horse, and put its great head down against her shoulder, and she stood in the floor of the pit with her hand in its ruff and looked up at me on the gallery wall, and I saw the whole hall understand at last what they had tried to feed to the dark. I went down. I walked out across the pit floor to my queen and her beast, past the place where 9 men had died, and the moonwolf watched me come and did not so much as bristle. I stopped before her, and there before the whole court of the North, the Iron King who knelt to no one knelt for the second time to the same woman, down on one knee on the stone, and I took her hand, the one that was not buried in the beast's gray ruff, and I pressed my brow to it. I kept a monster under my tower for a symbol, I said, loud enough for the gallery to hear, and it was never a monster. It was only a thing that had been given no name and no kindness, and so it gave the world back what the world gave it. I nearly did the same to you. I lifted my head and looked at her. The North has a queen now, and she was the stray you laughed at, and any soul in this hold who ever again speaks a word against her will answer to me, and to her, and I looked at the great beast at her side, to him. Rise, all of you, and look at what your fear could not see, and be ashamed, and then be better. They knelt. The whole court, the whole hall, my war captains and my kin, the men who had jeered her onto the ledge, they went down on their knees along the gallery and on the floor of the pit to Neve, to the queen who had been nothing, and I do not think it was fear that put them there. I think, for once in that hard hall's hard history, it was awe. The clean awe of people who have seen something true and been broken open by it, and come out the other side better than they went in. Neve stood in the center of it, the freed beast at her side and the kneeling king at her feet and the humbled court all around, and there was no triumph in her face. There was only that gray-eyed steadiness, and under it a great tenderness, and she reached down and touched my bowed head as if I were the one who needed gentling. "Get up, my lord of iron," she whispered, in the rough, sweet voice that had grown strong again over one warm winter. "You have knelt enough for one lifetime. Get up and rule your north, and let me stand beside you while you do it, not below and not above. Beside." I rose. I took my queen's hand, and the great moon wolf fell in at her other side, and we walked together up the iron stair and out of the pit and into the light of the first thaw, and the north was never the same again, and neither, thank every god of the old drowned kingdoms, was I. We were wed at the turning of the year, when the plateau came green. The beast never left her. It slept across the threshold of our chamber. She would have no door there either, and needed none, for nothing living would come past that gray guardian to trouble her sleep. It walked at her side through the halls of Caldrith, and the children of the hold, who had been raised on tales of the killing thing under the tower, learned within a single summer to run to it fearless and bury their hands in its ruff, and it suffered them with a patience that would have astonished the 9 men it killed. Sometimes, on the blue dark evenings she loved best, she would take the old bone flute to the eastern wall and play, and the beast would lift its great head and sing back, the two of them, the last singer and the last god-hound, the two halves of a craft the drowned world had made and forgotten, keeping each other company across the ruin of everything that had made them. I would stand in the doorway and listen, and the mark over my heart would warm, and I would think that a man could rule 40 more years and never earn a thing so far past his deserving. She gave the North a great deal in the years that came. She was a better queen than I was a king, wiser, gentler, harder to fool, softer to those who needed softness and iron to those who tried her mercy for weakness. The plateau prospered. The old cruelty went out of Caldrith like frost out of stone. And she never once in all our years let anyone call her astray or nothing or nameless, not because she was proud, but because she remembered always every soul in every cold country walking a low road with no place to go, and she would not let the hold forget them either. We took them in after that. It became the North's law and then the North's habit, the wanderer, the tongueless, the packless, the ones the world had thrown away. Caldrith's doors were open to them, off their hinges the way her own doors had always been. I asked her once, near the end of our long life together, sitting at the window in the blue hour she loved, with the old gray beast finally gone silver-muzzled and asleep at our feet, whether she had ever hated me in the beginning in the pit, before she knew what I was to be, whether she had ever, in all the winter I sat across her fire thinking I was so patient and so good, wanted only to be gone from the cold hold and the hard king and the whole cruel North that had used her. She was quiet a long moment, watching the plateau go from black to gray. "You knelt," she said at last, "in the pit, before you knew my name, before you knew what I was, when I was still just a stray your cousin had thrown to your beast. You knelt down in front of me and gave me your cloak and put your face below mine so I would not be afraid." She turned from the window and looked at me, and the gray of her eyes had not changed at all in all our years, and neither had the thing behind them. The whole world had spent my life looking down at me, my love. You were the first who ever looked up. I could not have hated you if I had tried. I have loved you since the cloak. The Iron King of the North knelt to no one, except to her, twice, before I knew her, and every day of my life after, in all the small ways a hard man learns to bow when something true has finally come into his house. I would kneel 1,000 times more, and count each one the proudest act of a long, proud life, and go gladly into the dark at the end of it, knowing I had spent my iron on the one thing in the whole cold world that was worth the bending. They had called her a stray with no name. She was the last singer of a drowned kingdom, and the queen of the north, and the naming of the nameless was the truest work she ever did, the beast's true name, and her own, and in the end mine. Not the Iron King at all when all was told, but only the man who was lucky enough to be hers.